welcome to the D3D4 Football Podcast with me, your host, James Richards. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another D3D4 Football Podcast. This week, plenty to talk about, looking back at the League 2 playoff final, looking back at the League 1 playoff semi-finals, plus Stevenage or Macclesfield. It drags on another week. We'll have a chat about that as well. Plus any other business. Joined this week, of course, by co-host Ed Walker. And returning to the pod for the first time for a little while, it's Gabriel Sutton. Gabe, welcome back.
Cheers, James. It's good to be back on.
Yeah, good to have you back on. And plenty to chat about. How have you been keeping, firstly, though?
Yeah, not bad. It's obviously been strange without being able to go to any matches, but I suppose spending a bit more time with the housemates has been nice. And we've been playing a bit of badminton in the garden, doing the odd workout here and there, which I'm not particularly good at, but I persist with it. It's been all right, I guess. I can't wait to actually be back at a match. That'll be pretty good.
Been enjoying your videos on Twitter as well, giving us your insight. That's always fun. So keep those up as well. Where to start? Well, we normally go League 1, League 2, but actually let's do it chronologically, because let's jump in and start this week with League 2.
League 2.
And I will admit it, I got it wrong. I thought Exeter would put up at least a bit more of a fight than they did. But all three of my co-hosts, when we discussed this last week, went with Northampton winning the final, and boy, were they right. It was a completely dominant Northampton performance, very much like they produced against Cheltenham in the second leg of their playoff semi-final. Not hugely surprising that their aim was to overpower Exeter, but Exeter, and Wembley, a bit like oil and water, they just do not mix well. It's been 3 playoff finals now for them in the last 4 seasons, each of them coming away from each of them with a defeat. At least the fans didn't have to travel up to London to watch it this time. They could just be content of crying into their laptops or wherever they were watching it. But it was Ed, a really poor Exeter performance before we start throwing superlatives at Northampton.
It's not really what you want from a playoff final, is it? I mean, from a Northampton perspective, they're obviously delighted, but there was only one team in that pretty much from the word go, pretty much from the moment Watson got that first goal. And it just always felt that they were one step ahead and that they were just going to increase that lead further rather than give it up.
It seemed like Exeter didn't... they must have known, this is Northampton, they're going to get lots of balls in the box, be physical, but Exeter didn't get the ball down or play it at all. They didn't look like they were trying to pass it through the thirds. They knew if they can get past the high press, if they can pass it through them. They've got some technicians in there. Nicky Law is a very good player. Randall Williams, he didn't do very much.
He had a couple of moments on the ball, but ultimately they dealt with him really well, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of two things, this game, isn't it? I mean, Exeter didn't turn up, but Northampton, boy, did they.
Definitely.
I think the other factor as well, and I'm not disputing anything that either of you have said, but maybe between like the 50th minute and the 60th minute when I think Matt Taylor brought a couple of substitutions on. Archie Collins might have been one of them. Exeter kind of looked like they were making some progress. And as Ed mentioned, Randall Williams had some decent touches. And then I think when Dean Moxey got sent off, that was obviously quite sadly his last act in an Exeter City shirt, which is a real shame considering that's all he's done. All he's done for the club. I think that just opened up the floodgates for Northampton to run away with it, really. So I think most of it was, yes, terrible Exeter performance, but I think at the moment when Exeter did look like they could have grown back into the game, they had that opportunity taken away from them as well.
Yeah, and not to be too harsh on Dean Moxey, but he's an experienced player, and it was a stupid challenge, wasn't it? I mean, Ed, that was, I said it on Twitter at the time, for an experienced leader of that team to make a stupid challenge like that and get sent off at a time when Gabe's just mentioned they were starting to maybe find their feet a little bit in that final. It's not a way you want to bow out after a pretty glowing career at a club that will be very close to his heart.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember it. We've had so many Reds in the EFL this week. Who was it on? I can't picture it. Who was it on? It was in the middle. It was around the middle of the pitch, wasn't it?
It wasn't Ryan Watson, was it? It might have been on Ryan Watson.
I think it might have been Ryan Watson, yeah. But it was a reckless challenge we all felt at the time, and no one was really that surprised to see a red card from it. So it is like Gabe has said, it's a terrible shame that a player who's done so much to this club, and that's his last action for it.
Indeed it is. And they just couldn't stand up to it physically. And then obviously ended up being his last act. And we'll come on to the released and retained list for both of these sides shortly. But let's talk about Northampton, because Keith Curle, first ever promotion. And, you may not be your cup of tea. He's a bit like Marmite, Keith Curle. You either love him or you loathe him. I mean, I'm sure some people will tolerate him somewhere in the middle ground there. But he has done a great job. Especially in these last 2 games, of getting his side completely focused and motivated on the task at hand. He's got them over the line and promoted into League One. Is his football incompatible with long-term success, Gabe? Because, we're no longer in those early 90s where you had the Wimbledons and the Cambridges who used to hit long balls and be that kind of what my dad would call kick and rush sort of style football. We tend to see, as you look at the 3 teams that got promoted from League Two this season, a far more methodical and sort of technical style of play coming into the lower leagues. Can Keith Curle really expect to have long-term success unless he changes his tactics, do you think?
I'm not sure I would agree with that. I think I understand where the idea comes from, that sort of the direct football is a bit old-fashioned, and I can see the theory behind that. But I actually think it's not so much the style of football itself that's old-fashioned. It's more that the style of football that Keith Curle likes requires a certain type of target man, and there's direct managers elsewhere in the EFL who are getting criticism for their style of play because they haven't got the right target man in place. I would say Sunderland and Shrewsbury are classic examples. I'm sure there's others. Whereas I think with Northampton, they brought Harry Smith from Macclesfield in the summer. They brought in Dave Oliver, and I think a lot of boards in that situation would have questioned, why are we signing players from clubs lower in the division? But I think the answer to that is that they one of a handful of people who can facilitate the style that Keith Curle likes, because once you've gone direct to the target man, that's the point where you can bring in the more technical players like the Adams, the Andersons, the Linkers, McCormack's even going a bit deeper. So I think having the right target man is crucial, and I think because of the way the youth system is set up, we don't have quite as many old-fashioned target men in the division as we used to have, and that's why clubs have to work a little bit harder to find players who are going to facilitate the style of a manager who likes to go direct.
Indeed. Well, exactly. The battering ram striker is a thing of the sort of mid-90s, really. You don't see it hugely in the game anymore. And like you say, it is an academy system that doesn't really play that style of football, so you have to tend to look sort of to those coming up through the non-league ranks to find it. But however, really well done to Northampton. In Callum Morton, they have a player on loan who, they hope to get him back. I've heard there's talk that's something that they're going to try and do. I wouldn't be surprised if they manage it, because they're going up into another league, and he's obviously done very well there. But he is a player with great technical ability, unbelievable determination and drive. And I know how to find the net, and I think, Ed, we've talked about it before, but another superb performance from the young man.
He's just been sensational, hasn't he, since arriving in the new year? I remember talking to a few West Brom fans after that playoff semi-final second leg, talking about how I'd love to see him get some games onto West Brom, but they're in contention for the Premier League promotion, and if they go up into the Premier League, they're probably not going to utilise him again, so they'll probably send him out again, and Northampton are without doubt going to be the first team to take an interest in him.
Yeah,
the others as well.
Yeah, a bit of first dibs, I think they can call. So Northampton get promoted. Keith Curle, huge credit for what he's done there. Whether or not you think he can take them further or not, I think he might be able to. I think he feels he's backed there. I think when you hear what he says, he feels he's got the backing, and he's got a project which he can work with and move forward with. So we'll see how that goes. I hope Nicky Adams recovers, because, of course, it was sad to see him limp out of the final after being so instrumental in getting them there with a great performance in that second leg at Cheltenham. So he should be hopefully back for next season. And they're going to have a decent squad. But they did release a few players that raised some eyebrows from their fans. I don't actually think any of them are that surprising. Jordan Turnbull, probably the most standout name like this. Alan McCormack, not surprised with him, or Andy Williams particularly, because they're at sort of the other end of their careers. But I don't know, Ed, what's your take on those players that they release? Because in these times when budgets are going to be, well, we assume they're going to be a lot tighter next season. In fact, I know a few clubs who I speak to who are already operating on a much lower scale than they were previously. Making some room for perhaps some new additions, some different style of players. Do you think that release list is good, bad, indifferent to it? What do you reckon?
No, I agree with you. Alan McCormack, yes, he's been sensational. He's on the pitch, but he has not played anywhere near the amount of game time you'd hope for this season. There seems to be a worrying, persistent injury issue he's had this season, which has really stopped him making the impact that he could have had, even more than he did. And Andy Williams, I think, a similar situation, like you said, coming towards the end of his career. David Cornell, that's been good, but Steve Arnold in the playoffs has been excellent as well. So,
well, there was talk, wasn't there, that David Cornell wanted to go anyway because he's had offers.
He's attracting interest, isn't he? I've seen that.
Yeah, I think offering him a contract may have been a futile experience anyway. Like Andy Williams, I think if you've got Andy Williams, but you've also got Harry Smith and Verdane Oliver, do you need Andy Williams signed on again?
I agree on that. I think I agree though that the weird one is Turnbull, especially since Wharton's presumably going back to Blackburn, which leaves them with basically, and Lloyd Jones, I believe, was on loan from Luton. He's going back there, which basically leaves you with Charlie Good as the only one of those centre backs. So
if you can keep hold of him.
If you can keep hold of him, and he's going to be in high demand because he's a quality defender. So we could see a completely new centre-back pairing or trio next season for them. Be interesting to see what happens.
Exeter also releasing some, I don't think, not particularly surprised to see Lee Martin go. Dean Moxey, considering his age. Lee Holmes, the forgotten man who's had a terrible season, out pretty much the entire campaign through injury. In fact, I don't think he played a game this season for Exeter. But Aaron Martin, Gabe, that was a little bit of a shock because I think he's been one of their best defensive players throughout this campaign. Yeah,
I was speaking to Alex Davison, who's an Exeter fan on Twitter, and he was saying that there's an argument to say that Aaron Martin's been possibly Exeter's best player this season, not even just best defender. So that shows how highly he's rated. I think maybe in the playoff final it suggested that Exeter are maybe a little bit short on physicality at the back because they obviously couldn't deal with Verdane Oliver's threat, and maybe they could have done with someone a bit more dominant in those situations.
Do you not think they could have started? I thought they should have started with Archie Collins and maybe Parks at the back to deal with Verdane.
What I would say though is that any team's short on physicality when you're up against that Northampton side. There isn't a stronger, bigger team at this level than them. So I don't think you can match on physicality, but you can try and compete with them certainly.
Well, I suppose it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because do you go with a more... Because I think Parks would have probably been more competent physically than somebody like Dean Moxey, who I think he's kind of quite limited physically at this stage of his career. But I think the other question is, did Exeter really try and go the other way and really try and do what someone like Plymouth Argyle would do and actually play their own game against Northampton? Because they were actually... sitting back for a lot of the first half in a way that suggested they were quite happy to accept long balls coming into their box, and yet they didn't really have the means to deal with them. So surely it would have made more sense for them to actually have a bit more conviction with their own game.
Yeah, I thought they lacked... that's exactly what I was thinking. They didn't look like they were going to... They played into Northampton's hands completely, and the scoreline reflects that, I think. But Ed, where next for Exeter? Matt Taylor obviously missed out on the playoffs. Progression this year, getting them into the playoffs and to another playoff final. But in uncertain times, do you think he is going to be able to lead them to maybe another level, or at least to the same sort of level they have been at this season next year?
You'd hope so, but I think this one's been really difficult to take. When you think about how well, I think Exeter have been in the top 7 for pretty much the majority of the season. They were up in the top 3 for so long and fell away at what has proven to be the worst possible moment, with football coming to a suspension, to an indefinite ending as well. So they need to build on that squad. They're going to do well to keep hold of some of the talents. We obviously know Randall Williams is attracting a lot of interest, but Archie Collins as well is the same. If they can keep hold of them and work on the players that they're getting rid of, they're certainly have the chance, and I would like to see them be competitive next year.
Gabe, do you think Matt Taylor we'll be able to see further progress after another disappointment in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like getting, because Dean Moxey, they've obviously released, and Craig Woodman. So there's a few players who had kind of been there for quite a long time that he's decided to be quite sort of ruthless with. I like Matt Taylor. I like what he's done, and as much as we might criticise him for what he said in the final, I actually thought that he showed quite a lot of adaptability for the second leg against Colchester, where he implemented a game plan very quickly that got the best out of his players, and so I like it from that point of view. I think they're probably going to need a quick strike net partner, Ryan Bowman, if they keep hold of him over the summer, because Lee Martin, as much as he isn't a finisher as such, he offered that sort of pace in behind, and certainly directness of movement that kind of created more space. And sometimes I feel like Bowman's been used as a target man as well when he isn't necessarily. I think he's probably better with the ball to feet, but I think Exeter struggled to kind of get the right balance to their side and have someone who's clinical. Nicky Ajose, there's a lot of question marks about his sort of all-round game. So I think if they can have sort of Bowman kind of coming into feet and then someone running off him who's quick and a bit of a finisher, I think that could be a missing piece of the jigsaw. I like the squad. I think, the basics are in there. Just a couple of areas to sort of build on, really.
Yeah, and I'd agree with pretty much all that. I mean, Ryan Bowman's one chance in the playoff final summed up Exeter at Wembley beautifully. Just clean through on goal and ended up tripping over his own feet, kind of thing. And yes, not the way Exeter would have wanted it to go, but given their record there, it's becoming a theme, and maybe they'll get past it at some point, but we'll have to wait and see. A little bit of EFL news from League Two. We were going to mention this a couple of weeks ago, and my bad for forgetting to add it into the list, but Mark O'Brien has obviously been forced to retire as a Newport player, Newport captain, leader.
Legend.
Yeah, complete legend. That goal he scored against Notts County to keep them in the league. Just want to wish him all the best, because what a difficult time that will be for him now. Obviously has to put his health first, and our best wishes go to him. Also to Jim Bentley, who is having to have heart surgery. Sounding like he's got an issue with one of the arteries. I was going to say that it can't do the heart any good being Morecambe manager for as long as he was. But we do, again, jokes aside, wish him absolutely all the best, and our thoughts are with him as he goes through this difficult procedure. But hopefully he's in good hands and will come out a lot better the other side of it. The other thing that is dragging on, and still persists to drag on, is this whole relegation from League Two. If indeed, the conference will start, because it'll be all pointless this if the Conference National can't start next season. But there is an appeal happening against Macclesfield's 2-point suspended sentence added onto their already long list of points deductions after they failed to fulfil fixtures this season, failed to pay players, and now there's an appeal to see if they can get another point or two taken off them so that they will go down in place of Stevenage. Now, regardless of who you think should go down, there's an argument that no one should, considering the circumstances of how the season ended. But this is unacceptable now. It's dragging on far, far too long. The EFL have shown a complete lack, I think, of leadership on this. They should have said, this is what the process is. Once this process is finished, that is it. Finished. I don't know what I'll get your take on this, Gabe, because we've talked about it amongst ourselves a fair bit on this pod. It's just frustrating for everyone, surely, not knowing what the future holds and what division potentially you could be playing in next season. Yeah,
absolutely. My impression on this is, and forgive me, I'm not a sort of legal expert, but I get the impression that the EFL as a body want Macclesfield to go down, so that if they have financial issues when football returns, it won't be under their sort of umbrella, if you like. And obviously, there are major sort of ownership issues at Macclesfield Town with Ammar El-Qadi's regime, and probably it's not necessarily the EFL's fault in this case, because El-Qadi was on board well before Macclesfield were involved with the EFL, but you do question like how obviously with the news quite recently as well about Wigan Athletic and whether there's enough generally in football, whether there's enough scrutiny as to potential incoming people and what their intentions are, and whether there's the distribution of wealth as well to attract people with sort of sound intentions. I think there's major question marks about that. But I get the sense that really it's an independent panel perhaps that have actually voted perhaps against the EFL to keep Macclesfield in the league, because Stevenage have been the worst team in the division by some distance on the field.
Yeah, I mean, is this right, though, that an independent panel is then challenged by the EFL because the independent panel didn't come up with the answers the EFL were looking for? You know, what's the point? Look, my point here is if the EFL want Macclesfield out, kick them out. Say you're out because you can't provide us with enough reassurances that you can complete next season or fulfil fixtures. Don't go with this whitewash. You know, it's not fooling anyone. If you want them out, kick them out. Don't start just trying to deduct enough points to get them to finish bottom. It's embarrassing, and it's embarrassing for everyone, and we can all see what's happening. You know, I have no problem with Stevenage staying up if Macclesfield are going to be unable to fulfil, you know, the duty of a football club, which is to pay your staff and players on time and to be able to fulfil your fixture list next season. If they can't do that, then, you know, hugely feel sorry for the supporters, but you can't allow that to continue indefinitely. Bury weren't given any stay of execution or anything like that. So, you know, you could argue it shouldn't happen for Macclesfield, but this whole charade of it being, it's got to be done with integrity, blah, 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 blah. Don't give me that. You're trying to get rid of Macclesfield because they are causing you too much of a problem in an administration sense. You just got to kick them out.
If I can also say, I think there's a major problem about the FA as well, because I don't actually think the EFL have much money when it comes to sort of legal debates, and certainly when it comes to helping clubs and sort of rebalancing the distribution of wealth, which I think is a major issue. So I think the FA have to be held accountable for this as well, because they're not interested in helping out lower league clubs, sadly.
No, and I think there needs to be a long-term solution. We interviewed MP Damien Collins. His idea, I think, is the best I've heard thus far. I mean, if anyone could come up with any better ideas that would secure or help clubs in dire straits, I'd like to hear them, but I haven't as yet heard anything more convincing than that. But anyway, we'll leave it there because it's going to drag on potentially now for another month maybe, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But let's move on to matters on the field again as we dive into League One.
League One.
And we'll start with Portsmouth versus Oxford. It finished 1-1 at Fratton Park on Friday, sort of at the earlier kick-off on Friday. Ronan Curtis scoring a goal which Simon Eastwood will not want to see again. And Marcus Brown then equalising with a lovely goal, breaking away, cutting inside, doing what he does best, and finishing really well sort of inside the near post against the keeper. Portsmouth, the better team, I have no doubt about that. You watch the match, they started better, they had the better chances, they looked more threatening. Oxford looked a little bit sluggish, like they had, like you'd expect after not playing football for 120 days or something.
115, I think it was.
115 days, yeah. So it didn't look like an Oxford side that were so sharp just before the lockdown. It looked like a side that's just coming into a pre-season, but has got a general idea of how they're playing and want to play. But they didn't quite get going. Didn't win many second balls. Were pretty disappointing in that sense. But we've got a good result, all things considered. Rob Dickey was excellent. Ronan Curtis was superb. I don't know, Ed, if you want to add anything on this, because it's left the game perfectly poised for Monday night.
I think we all kind of felt that out of the two, this one was possibly going to be the closer. I mean, they were meant to be close ties. We'll talk about the second game, obviously.
I thought they were both going to be extreme. If you look at the results recently between Fleetwood and Wycombe, I don't think anyone scored. Hardly any of the games had more than like 2 goals, and they've always been like 1-0, 2-1, 1-0. So I didn't expect what happened in the other one, which we'll come to in a minute.
Yeah.
I was hoping Oxford would get a point, not a point, but a draw at least at Fratton Park.
It kind of, well, I guess now you could say is their home advantage in the second leg. I kind of think the first leg has been kind of a build up to the second one now. Everything matters with this. We haven't got the home crowds. There's no away goals. It basically just becomes a case of who emerges victorious goes to Wembley.
The one thing I'd say that gives Oxford an edge is the fact that they've played at a stadium with no atmosphere for like 16 years. So it's not going to affect them. Having an open end, not being unfair to the Oxford fans who do try their best, but, we all know that Oxford's got the worst stadium in the EFL for atmosphere. If you've got a huge gaping hole at one end of the pitch, it's never going to be able to generate a sort of a cacophony of noise that Fratton Park does. So potentially Oxford will be so used to playing in a sort of muted atmosphere that it won't really affect them. Whereas you wondered with Portsmouth, because they've had such a good home record this season, how not having fans there would affect them. And maybe, there was a couple of decisions, a couple of penalty calls that you would have expected the referee could have given if there was a loud sort of Fratton end, or it used to be the KJC stand when they first built it. I don't know what they call it now.
It's called Fratton end now.
The Fratton, yeah. So I mean, if they were in full voice, I reckon a couple of decisions would have gone Portsmouth's way potentially. There were a couple of close calls. I think Dan Agai brought down was it Ronan Curtis, and it could have possibly been a penalty. A couple of decisions like that, but. Yes, perfectly poised. I'd like to see Oxford just try and get a little bit more settled, keep the ball slightly better, and deal with Ronan Curtis. There's clearly, they knew that Sam Long is kind of the weak link. And I think what people forget with Oxford is that we had Chris Cadden as our key right back. He left in January, then Shannon Baptiste, and then Tarek Fosu. So we've lost basically a very good trio of players halfway through the season. So if we can still stay the course and make it to the playoff final, it would be a pretty big achievement, because Portsmouth are a side with, they're a bigger club than Oxford, let's face it, and they've got, it's probably a deeper squad, maybe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd also, talking from a Portsmouth perspective as well, I was really impressed with Ross McCrory, who has shown this season that he's competent at midfield and at right back, and I think he's a very intelligent player, both when in possession and both when out of possession as well. He anticipates the movement of his opponent very well, and then he's got the mindset to just knock the ball past someone or play it into a bit of open space and knock around as well. So I'm excited to see him. He's 22, I think, currently loaned for Rangers, and he'll be one to watch in the future, whether he has it in Scotland or England.
Yeah, no, he did look very good. I thought Lee Brown had a good game as well. Very experienced performance from him. Didn't really get drawn into too many sort of pitch battles, showed great strength, and Portsmouth looked pretty solid defensively, I thought, for most of that game. They've got Tom Naylor who could come in to the next game, as John Marquis could also. John Marquis came on in the second half, but I mean, having him as a sub is just ridiculous. I mean, what a good player to be able to bring into the action. So I would imagine, and Kenny Jackett doesn't do drastic things at all with his tactics, but I would imagine he got to start one of those two on Monday. We'll see.
Does he start Ryan Williams as well? That's my question.
Well, he's another great player. Really energetic, sort of, never say die winger, isn't he? I mean, he's another top talent to be able to rotate into your side if you need to. So, but there was nothing to talk about in the Fleetwood Wycombe game, so we'll leave it there.
Yep.
Yeah, nothing happened at all. I mean, actually, I was in the garden with the kids. I thought I'll take them out because they've had to sit through an Oxford game with no crowd, and it was tedious for them. So I said, right, we'll go in the garden. Nothing's going to happen in this game early. They've all finished 0-0. Come in. Sorry, that's me macking my laptop there. Come in. 10 minutes I missed. Maybe 11 minutes. I come in. It's 2-1. We've had a penalty. We've had a cracking goal. We've had a goalkeeper punching the ball into his own net. I mean, I was like, what have I missed? This is ridiculous. So absolutely crazy. But where do we start with it? I mean, Wycombe obviously came out of the blocks quite quickly, but the one thing I watched from this is that Fleetwood looked ill-disciplined. They looked slightly unprepared for what Wycombe had to offer, and they were their own worst enemy. I mean, Alex Cairns had a nightmare game. He made a penalty save, which was really good to see, because that kind of made up slightly for punching Joe Jacobson's corner into his own net. But How Fleetwood even got a penalty for that, I mean, phantom touch on their forward, I don't know. But let's go with you, Gabe, firstly. What are your thoughts on this ridiculously action-packed game?
Well, I was considering the squads available to both teams. I was very surprised about this because I think on paper Fleetwood have the higher pedigree in their group, and they've got people like Paul Coots and Glenn Whelan in their midfield, which you would think would allow them to impose an element of control against a side that are very, very much have been the underdogs all season. But I suppose if there's one thing we've learned, it's underestimate Wycombe at your peril, and they were outstanding really. And probably saw the softest and the most blatant penalties of the League One season all in the same half of football, as well as Jacobson scoring from his own corner, but also missing from 12 yards in the middle of the penalty area. So, it's a very strange game, I suppose.
Unforgivable stuff from Fleetwood in terms of discipline. Louis Coyle with the most reckless challenge and needless challenge, you have to say. And then Paddy Madden, claiming it was a blatant pen. It wasn't blatant. The guy touched his arm and he flung himself down. And then he, loses his rag, swears at the linesman, maybe even the ref as well, and gets sent off for 2 bookable offences inside 30 seconds. I mean, he's their top scorer. He's now not available for a game which they have to score at least 4 goals in to progress to the playoff final. It's I don't want to write them off, but it's not going to happen. It's you can't see it. Wycombe conceding 4 goals without reply at home against a team without one of their best defenders and their top scorer. I don't know, Ed. I mean, to me, the lack of discipline. I mean, they could have had maybe another red card as well. I mean, it wasn't a good performance from Fleetwood for many reasons, but I think the discipline or lack of it just shot themselves in the foot.
You're still a bit stunned thinking about it, really. I mean, I don't think Wycombe were actually that exceptional. Yeah, they had a plan. They played it effectively. They played effective football. They had a good plan. They executed it. Played with a good intensity. The fact it was 4-1 was because Fleetwood completely imploded. Imploded.
At 2-1, there was plenty of fight left in that game. That game had loads to run, but
yeah, definitely.
Getting 2 men sent off. I mean, Paddy Madden's may not have affected the match because it was quite late on in the game, about sort of 7 minutes to go or whatever. But it affects the second leg, doesn't it?
It does, and I've been looking it up, and no team has ever overturned a 3-goal first leg deficit in the whole history of the playoffs across any division. So if they somehow pull this off without the top scorer and without, I'd probably say, their best right back, it is probably the greatest comeback I've ever seen. I know I've got ahead of myself before. We made this mistake with League Two, but it really is one hell of a comeback if they turn this around at Adams Park on Monday.
Yeah, I can't see it happening. I mean, when you've got Michael Jackson as your reincarnate, as your manager, did anyone see Gareth Ainsworth's lovely
yes
ensemble? Yeah, not the usual garb that you see managers in. I mean, that's his style, I suppose. But yeah, I thought it was quite. I think it was quite good.
Joey Barton had a bit of an interesting look about him as well, to be honest.
Yes, he looked like a sort of French detective from the 1980s, didn't he?
It did. It was a very interesting mix of styles on the touchline that game.
Yeah, but it little good did it do him on the night, and I think huge credit to Wycombe though. They had a game plan. They exhibited great discipline, great work ethic, and they held their nerve. And Wes Burns I thought was very good for Fleetwood, but he put so many good balls in the box. Ched Evans looked off the pace, to be honest. He had several tantalising crosses which he was nowhere near getting on the end of, and I suppose when you've got a man like those things happen. But yeah, it's going to be. I think the second leg to really look at is the Oxford Portsmouth one, because it's so tightly poised for what could be a really interesting game. Whereas this one, you're just going to see, I think, Wycombe make sure they are disciplined. Yeah. 2 lines of 4, and see it out.
All they need is a professional job and they're through, and you trust Wycombe to do that in the course of the season, don't you?
Yeah, apart from Coventry thrashing them there at Adams Park, I don't think anyone really has turned them over at home all season. So, yeah, I think that one is probably in the bag. and I'll go as
Yeah.
far to say that.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts, gentlemen, on the playoff semi-finals? Starting with you, Gabe, anything you want to add?
Well, I'd just like to give a credit to Alex Samuel, because I know a lot of Wycombe fans were saying they, maybe need a striker in January, but I just think he brings that team so much with his pace and his energy and his tenacity, and he gives them something different to Bayer Akinfenwa, who also sort of plays his own part over the course of the season. But I remember seeing Samuel against Blackpool in January, and he had a fantastic game that night, and it's a shame maybe that he hasn't been able to get more goals for himself, but I just think he brings so much to the team, so I'm really pleased that he did manage to get on the score sheet the other night.
Yeah, and got the official man of the match award as well, so really well done to him. I think Namdi Ofabora was their other key man, who was excellent. Yeah. And also, like I said, David Wheeler, as I mentioned to you guys before we started recording, he had an excellent game as well. Plenty of candidates for Wycombe. I think only really Wes Burns comes out of this with any credit for Fleetwood, and Alex Cairns with a nightmare night, which he'll look. I mean, people were cussing him on Twitter. I mean, it was a poor night, but he's actually been a very good goalkeeper.
Yeah, he's actually a decent goalkeeper, by the way, guys. He's not. He's just had a really bad game there.
Yeah, he's been good. He makes some fantastic saves across the course of the season. But anyway, we must wrap it up. That's left us with some really interesting talking points, no doubt, for when we next convene. Thank you very much for listening to this. If you are a patron, again, really appreciate your support. If you want to help us continue doing these podcasts and develop our content for the website and on Twitter, then you can support us for only $1, which is about 80p, I think, as it stands right now, a month, using our Patron campaign. And we do have D3D4 merch. If you want to have a look at it or suggest any ideas, we can create stuff for clubs. We did some stuff for Crew, got a couple of Oldham ideas out there, and obviously I'm actually wearing my It's shit ground real fans. I thought that was quite amusing, because that chant is so often, especially when I was growing up, it was used to deride lower league clubs in cup games when Premier League fans came. But I think I twisted it a little bit on its head there, because I think those fans that turn up week in, week out to support their club in the EFL, especially when you look at Oldham, not won a thing for 29 or 30 years. They've got a very nice new kit, by the way, coming out for the 125th anniversary.
Yeah, I quite like that kit, actually. It looks pretty sound.
It's good to see the old owl back on the badge, because the one they've got now looks pretty evil, actually. Nice to see the old one back. But so we've got some merch out there, and if you want to have a look, go ahead. Really fun stuff, and it's again, we don't make any real money from it, but it's more about just having a bit of fun for lower league fans anyway. But until next week, guys, take care, whatever you're doing, wherever you are. Make sure you watch the games on Monday night, and we'll see you next week to have a good chat about them. Goodbye.